So, guys, I am excited to kind of talk with you a little bit about rhetoric. And rhetoric is a word that gets maligned, right? So, I'm going to put my headphones in now because I think this will give us a little clearer sound. But rhetoric often is the idea of BS that is manufactured. This is the kind of junk that we have to listen to, right? The people lying to us, basically. Well, we're going to try to reinterpret that a little bit in this particular section. So listening becomes the key word, but it's rhetorical listening. It's not listening where you get run over. It's not listening because you're trying to capitulate. It's listening not only to understand, but to position oneself in relationship and in responsiveness to the dignity of life, not even the other person. And that sounds very esoteric and wow, beautifully idealistic even, right? But the idea here is to kind of think a little bit more broadly toward a moment that is set up, meaning it's a little bit beyond you and a little bit beyond the person that you're with. It's something that can be thought of as a communication with each other toward a purpose. And so if we look at Project One, we looked at cultural literacy. Literacy, the idea of any kind of understanding, any kind of knowledge practice. We'll look briefly at definitions in a moment. And so we did a snapshot, and it was a quick entry, and it really taught us a couple things. Number one, literacy. Number two, analysis. Number three, genre, the idea that some things transfer in terms of meaning or are embellished or changed altogether just by shifting from lyrics to song to music video. Well, in this particular point, getting back to what we can see on screen here, we are definitely driven by perception and analysis, but perception is also formed by listening. And we could even say it's a form of listening. And listening in this sense is shaping communication. And that is really what rhetoric is. It's a form of information or communication that is shaped to an audience. The audience can be ourselves. And that sounds a little weird, but yes, we can actually shape the writing and reading and the communication in whatever form we take in to ourselves. But mostly it's used as a term to shape toward other people, meaning we're using it to make sure we're effective. So rhetoric is often defined in lots of ways. We'll look at it in a moment again, but overall a strategy to effectively communicate with others. So in this particular course, we're talking about academic writing. How does that boil down? Well, it boils down in this way. It will help us synthesize contrary views. The writing skills will be furthered in this unit will be comparison and contrast, analytics, definition-based argument, a really awesome skill to harness, overall synthesis and framing, and more specifically, the framing of one's argument as a problem that your audience can acknowledge as worthy of consideration. So we'll do a lot of breakouts. Let's look a little bit briefly at a couple of other definitions. And these, I would say, go ahead, probably a good idea, take notes. All right, the ability to read and write, recap. You don't necessarily have to take notes on this. We've kind of hit these points, but we know that reading and writing is the basis of literacy, right? And we've joked a bit in this course that sometimes literacy gets reduced to that. Oh yeah, it's that thing we got to learn, or people have got to learn, or it's about school, it's about tests, it's about, maybe people in developed countries learning how to read and write. Okay, and then we said, well, let's go a little further. So we pushed to the idea that it's about a knowledge-making practice and maybe the skills and practices in general to get booted up to be able to do things. So how to evaluate, how to interpret, how to apply that know-how to accomplish a goal. And then we went to this main definition, and that is that it's a knowledge-making practices that promote a relationship. And we're going to hit this again and again as we move toward Project 3. The idea that it's not just about a skill, it's not just about the know-how, it's not just meeting a goal that's very personally driven, it's about building towards something. And that's the idea that we're in relationships whether we can acknowledge it or not. Literally, the oxygen given to us is a relationship between the earth and us. And we may acknowledge it or we may not, right? We may be arrogant enough to say, I can kind of do my own thing, but literally you couldn't if you didn't have the oxygen in your lungs. So you are in a relationship, and do you realize it or do you not is maybe a really good thing to think about in terms of rhetoric and in terms of how we position our communication. So recognizing the environment, recognizing others, and also purposing towards certain relationships that we select or think that are more important. All right, definitions of rhetoric. Here we go. So let's hit them quick. Number one, main definition is the art of persuasion. and communication strategies. So we're obviously angling towards someone and making sure they're going to be convinced of something. Communication strategies, though, a little bit more broadly. Sometimes we don't really want to angle towards selling, and sometimes that idea of selling is where rhetoric gets its bad name. So I want to allow for two different definitions here. And we're going to look at some classical definitions. The first one is from Aristotle, and it is that rhetoric is a craft. You can learn it, you can work it. And Aristotle actually trained citizens in Athens to defend themselves in court of law. So in that day, they had democracy. And that means that if you got accused by someone, let's say a plagiarism in their form, right? You were then put in a tribunal in front of all your citizens. It was everyone who shows up at that moment to decide whether you are guilty or not. So you better be ready, right? You better be ready to defend yourself, ready to make your case to your fellow citizens. And that is what Aristotle would train you for. So he was a philosopher, yes, but he was also a practitioner and trainer in the art of rhetoric. So he said, hey, I can teach you this because it's a craft in which you can use means to persuade. I can kind of give you some pointers as to how to make that case. Plato came back, and this is through Socrates, of course, with the idea that, well, this is really bogus because in his day, he's watching all these people on the street corners hawking their wares, if you will. All these lawyers, can I use that in quote marks, these philosophers, if you will, the bad versions of Aristotle saying, hey guys, come over here, I got a deal. I'll make sure, wink, wink, you give me so much money, I can teach you how to be persuasive. It was their version of, get rich or, let's make a deal kind of idea that we often have with some real crude forms of business consultants in our day. So that's where it comes from, and that's the reactionary point. So you can see almost a polarity. Oh, it's a craft. You need to learn, be persuasive. Oh, it's crazily bogus, and it's not even tethered to ethics, and it's all manipulation. And boy, by the way, huckstered by people that aren't very ethical. Well, somewhere in the middle, now we go to 20th century, we've got 1951 to 53, we have a series of books that are published by Kenneth Burke. One of them is called The Rhetoric of Motives. And Kenneth Burke becomes sort of the lion of new theory of rhetoric. He comes in and he says, hey guys, on the heels of World War II, we got to learn a few things. And the main thing we got to learn is that we have to identify better with each other. So you can persuade a person only in so much as you can identify with them, right? So the art of identification that establishes at least understanding, if not agreement, but understanding between parties. And this is difficult, right? We're in an age right now where what? Understanding? Yeah, I understand. I just want to beat you. This is what a Democrat would say to a Republican or a Republican to a Democrat in our current rhetoric. We need to get beyond that, right? So we're going to talk a lot about a literacy of composure. This is sort of a resolution, taking literacy, matching it with rhetoric, and kind of moving us toward understanding what is a literacy of composure. It's an embodied knowing. I'm going to go over these quickly because we're going to come back to this slide and touch it probably twice more during our time in this unit. We've got plenty of time. Look at the calendar. We're going to have a good run through this unit. But the first main definition of composure is the idea of knowing. It's a sort of a gut sense. It is a presence-based, intuitive grasp of the situation. Some would say it is, like the one person on Star Trek. I don't know the character, but was a person that was totally intuitive. It was the counselor character. Those of you Trekkie fans will say, oh, well, you know who this is. Well, just top of my head, I'm thinking of this. But there's this person that just simply knows, right? It's mama. It's mom knows somehow something's going on. Sometimes it has that emotional, really cool EQ going, if you will, emotional intelligence. But sometimes it could be more analytical, even intellectual. So, but ultimately it is considering the sense that it is a more holistic understanding. It's not just here in the head, not just here in the heart. It's a sense of time, place, and recognizing something going on. All right, now we're getting a little more specific. It's cultivating self-awareness before you analyze and judge. And this is hard. We're going to step back to go forward. We're going to say, what's going on in me? What's going on in the situation as I'm appraising it? And then I come back and maybe more objectively be able to deduce the parts of the situation. So we want to get to that first. The third thing is it's attuning. And this is a verb put in verb sense because it's a constant calibration. It's a mindful response to the given. And often it's a rhetorical situation, a situation that does involve a lot of persuasion. And we're going to practice intentional presence and regard for the quiet. So we're looking also to smartly say, hey, out of quiet, out of composure, out of moments that are, if you will, off stage, we can better understand, better comprehend, better situate ourselves and analyze and judge to be able to engage our audience. So we attune, we cultivate self-awareness, we have a sense of the gut intuition, embodied knowing, and now we're bringing, if you will, holistically toward recognizing a type of literacy, coding and decoding the moment and working with a person. And this comes in real life situations. So when I talk about this with peers, I would talk about it, as a teacher of writing, as designing classrooms, for example, as makerspace studios, making sure that we have a sense that we're kind of co-sharing, co-working, collaborating, right, in making art, making writing as a revelation of our own take on certain data. And it's not so individualistic. I don't want to get solipsistic. Solipsistic is a fancy word for saying it's too much referential to one's own self. But we are looking at examples here of saying, the second example, witnessing community moments. Again, advancing relationships, having guest artists in the classroom. Different ways of, if you will, building toward an understanding through collaboration. And that is that basic idea. So let's run through them real quick. An embodied knowing, that type of rhetoric that comes from a gut sense, EQ and IQ, cultivating self-awareness before you analyze and judge. Attuning, a constant calibration where you respond to the given, often rhetorical, meaning persuasive situation. And then a recognition, a type of literacy that codes, decodes moments that comes out of what's called a kairotic moment. That's a really fancy phrase. It's an old-fashioned word from the Greeks that meant the opportune moment. Kairos means the opportune moment. So you know when to act, right? So these are all kind of, if you will, good first takes to get us into what we're going to do for today. So let's roll into it. And we only have about 5 more minutes, so don't worry, because this can get too wonkish. But I wanted to introduce the reading, and I'm going to do so briefly without overriding the reading. So I'm going to skip pretty quickly through because I know you'll go ahead and read it on your own, but I want to make sure you have at least a sensibility coming in this, right? So first of all, what the heck is rhetoric? What is this book about, right? So the book is put out by Blackwell Publishing, is an academic publisher, Wayne Booth, and it's called The Rhetoric of Rhetoric, The Quest for Effective Communication. Came out in 2008. Wayne Booth was a preeminent rhetorician in the field and has a lot to say about thinking about the ethical constructs. I mean, not just persuasion, but persuasion in terms of what is best, what is most optimal for society. And that's what you'll feel throughout the piece. So he said that, no critical judgments can be more complicated than trying to distinguish good rhetoric from bad. You can see this as I'm circling right here on the screen. So he's saying we have to do that. That's already an assumption, and you can go ahead and talk and think that through. You can see that he defines rhetoric as the science of speaking well, like as having a virtue, and that's Quintilian, who's an ancient rhetorician, a Roman orator, all right, who often believed in education as a means of furthering good communication. So let's just walk through a couple things here. So we see on the next page, a lot of the ideas of what he's trying to launch towards. So his claim is that ethical judgments inevitably, right here, I can't quite, underline, unfortunately, with this, intrude even on our judgments of technique. And he uses 3 different words, 3 different rhetorical kinds. And so you don't need to look this up. Some of the language will be a little bit thick here. And so I would just say, don't worry about it. You can skim. I'll give it very briefly. But he says that ethics apply to all traditional kinds of rhetoric. Deliberative is the idea of literally deliberating, often through debate. Forensic is law-driven. You're trying to find, if you will, what is right and wrong in the case of law. the courts of law. And epideictic is the idea of speaking often at a ritual or an event or ceremony. It is more spontaneous oftentimes too. All right, so how do morals apply is the major idea of this particular piece. And let's look very briefly now at the three kinds, and I'll let you read, if you will, everything else. So he's going to talk about win rhetorics and the idea of what makes a victory, if you will. He's going to give us, if you will, three different kinds of rhetoric for each situation. Here we see the honest kind. My goal is to win because my cause is just. Now, here's the only issue with this style of rhetoric is that my opponent is absolutely wrong, right? So maybe Winston Churchill's speech in World War II, as the British Chancellor says to his own people, guys, you know, we have got to win at all costs against these Nazis. Well, seems honest, seems the cause is right, seems the other guy is wrong. This might be a good example of this kind of honest kind of winner rhetoric. But he also has other kinds of rhetoric. So we can see, if you will, more slippery kinds. Since my case is absolutely justified, I will win at all costs, including the cost of integrity. That's a B form. C form, oh, my issue is unjust, but hey, winning is profitable to me, and so what? I'm going to be tricking if I have to. So he talks about that. Second kind of rhetoric, of course, we can break this down as bargaining. And here the idea is we're trying to mediate and work out a situation. In ideal terms, you would be avoiding, according to, again, Booth, a little bit of value here. I want to avoid violence by achieving productive compromise. All right. And then the second form would be that, hey, I will compromise even if I know the result is evil. So you can see the second one is bargaining away a little bit of integrity. And the third form, of course, will be just like sort of winner takes all mentality, or just it's all about me without any ethical grounding. So we'll see the third kind over here is I want to bargain, but I don't know how to do it. I'll simply say yes, concealing my actual hopes. This is sort of saying, I'm going to capitulate to the process. I'm going to capitulate without any grounding really in terms of thorough ethics. All right, the third form, and we're going to concentrate a lot in this class on it, so take a little more time to decipher this, is listening rhetoric. This is the idea of being persuasive, but with a purpose, right? So how do I listen beyond just simply co-option, right? Letting the other person run the show. And this is going to be very interesting for us to look at. So I need to make sure I'm moving in the right space. Okay, let's go here. So listening, I'm not just seeking the truth. I want to pursue the truth behind our differences. Such a key definition. I want to get at the truth. I want to get at the perception. I want to get at the composure, the understanding, the grounding. All right. And so I'm going to pursue that. Whether or not I'm going to be fully acknowledged even by you. So it's an interesting shift, not just in trying to persuade a person, but really, if you will, position a moment. Be truthful, if you will, to a moment. So we see the first point here is I have reason to hope my opponent here will respond to my invitation for both of us to engage in genuine listening. So a rhetoric that is built on intent, that is built on a sense of give and go, that we're going to listen with the idea that my opponent will respond to the invitation. Interesting, right? It's invitational. Secondly, though I am quite sure my opponent is determined to ignore my case, I will listen to his. Crazy. I will listen to his even though I might get blown off, right? Hoping to discover some way to engage him in genuine dialogue. So I'm going to pursue it even though. So we see the shift really toward an engagement based on terms other than your own or for your own sake. Now, these three rhetorics are not saying one's better than the other. It's just saying situationally, this might be a type that we pursue more often than we would think. I mean, or we would even surface this kind of rhetoric because we mostly think about win rhetorics or bargain rhetorics. And this is really what Booth's project is here. So, okay, my opponent might ignore me. I'm still going to engage because I think this genuine dialogue leads beyond a truce to a discovery of truth beyond difference. All right, C, the shoddy version, as he called it, a shoddy version of win rhetoric. I know that only by listening closely to my opponent can I hope to outsmart her and thus gain what I want. So, kind of ugly. All right, for the rest of the piece, you'll see him really talk about examples from the Iraq War, from other particular incidents where he's seen these rhetorics play through, and he'll give you more examples. Now, he does give you two other versions, a surrender rhetoric of listening, and lastly, also a listening of dogma. I'll be so committed to my listening dogma, I will insist on it. So you listen my way or no way. as you go through these, you can get lost. Okay, that's why I want to do this lecture. I'm out in a minute. But the deal is, guys, I want you to focus in on an aspect of the rhetoric that you might want to optimize yourself. What is it that would be making for persuasive communication more effectively in terms of the way you parse and read what you're reading here in your first year at the university? What do you want to gain not only out of the knowledge, but how do you want to position what you know? All right. How would you talk about it with somebody else to get to a better level, if you will? And I'm using that kind of broadly, right? I mean, what's a better level? Well, it just means maybe if we go to this listening model, it means that we're trying to advance truth beyond ourselves. It's a little bit back to that key definition. And I'm going to hit this a lot. You know, it's kind of my thought here. I'm not just seeking a truth right here in the middle of the page. I want to pursue the truth behind our differences. I'm going to work for something that says, hey, maybe we can go a little further than what's given by others or what others presume can be done. All right, that's that. I hope you enjoyed. And guys, we will definitely chatter more about this throughout this particular unit. Please feel free, as always, all right, email, contact me. I can all set up short Zoom meetings. Sometimes 5-10 minutes does wonders for us to not only get clarity, but a good sense of launch, a fresh page to work in this next project. All right, take care. We'll catch you next week.